Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to another edition of Encounters. The ordinary conversation with extraordinary people does not get more extraordinary than the conversation we're going to have today with our guest who's made it here from the USA. His name is Gursant Singh, and he needs no introduction. If you know anything about Sikhism in the United States, whether it's 3HO or whether it's Orthodox Sikhism, this is a man who has led a life that is beyond imagination. If you think that truth is always more horrifying than the fiction, then this is the man that will make that horror realistic. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Gursant Singh, we first thank you for taking your time out to join us in the studio here at Encounters.
My pleasure.
I said horror story. It's not quite a horror story, but it has had horrific moments. It has had joys, the troughs and peaks that we all experience in life. But your troughs and peaks have been quite a bit more extreme than the average person. Would you agree?
Well, I would agree with that.
Brilliant. Can we, if we can, just explain to our Sangattv a little about who you are, by way of a short biography, before we discuss what you do now and who you are, what you represent now. It's fair to say that you were brought up in a pretty orthodox Christian family in Texas?
No, in California.
In California?
Southern California.
Yuba City?
No, actually in Southern California,
Right.
near Los Angeles, Claremont, California.
Okay, and it's part of an Orthodox Christian upbringing.
I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
Very structured.
Yeah.
The mother has her roles, quite narrowly defined role. Father is the breadwinner.
Yes.
Military.
Yes, my father was in the Marine Corps for 14 years, and then after he was discharged honorably from the U.S. military, he went into business after that. Yeah.
And then, was it expected of you to then follow your father's footsteps in the military as well?
Yes, that was my thought, and I tried to join the U.S. military in 1982 after I'd become a Sikh, and of course I was wearing full beard and the star, and the U.S. military refused to admit me because of my dress.
Do you know if there was any Sikh before 1982 that tried to join the military and was refused?
Well, there was a history of Sikhs actually in the military for many years before that, but because...
Wearing at the start?
Yes, that's right. In fact, Truman, President Harry Truman in 1948 had exempted Sikhs from the dress code so that they could join the military. That was in 1948. That's when he integrated the U.S. military racially as well. So there were Sikhs already serving in the U.S. military at the time and had been serving quite honorably as well. But because of the moral majority in the early 1980s, and Ronald Reagan put a stop to the Sikhs being able to join the military with our the star and full
with the
yeah.
star.
Yeah.
But you'd been to military school prior to that with no issues, as you were not quite a Sikh at that point.
Yeah, that's right. I had become a Sikh in the late 70s,
Right.
and before that I had been in a military school, and I was part of a rifle team there, and so I had quite a bit of experience with military.
But just a short while later, it was impermissible, and you can't
Yeah.
join the military because you're now wearing the star.
Right, right.
So in that short period between growing up as a Christian,
Mhm.
having your future laid out before you
Mhm.
to follow in your father's footsteps,
Mm.
what drew you to Sikhism? What all of a sudden your paths have become divergent?
Well, there was a lot of problems that I saw within the Christian faith. Although I did have an affinity towards belief in one supreme God, one timeless God, there was, I felt, a lot of almost like cult worship of Jesus, and the other things in Christianity I observed were hypocritical actions by some of the leaders in the Christian church. So I was drawn towards a religion like Sikhi that believed in one God, which has that similarity. And then also, there is no worship of any human being like there is in Christianity. So our allegiance is to the Siddhi Guru Granth Sahib as a Sikh, and that's probably the biggest thing that drew me to Sikhi, was the idea that Waheguru is the only one that we worship, and not any kind of living being.
At what point did you even realise that Sikhism existed? Was it simply 3HO, or was it you realised Sikhi somewhere and then realised that 3HO was on your doorstep? Which came first?
Well, I was quite disturbed, I guess you could say, by what I had observed in the Christian faith.
Yeah.
And so when I was in college, I was actively searching for a spiritual path that I could identify with. So I did meet up with some of the teachers of yoga that were followers of Yogi Bhajan at that time. I was in college, and I was about my early 20s, I would say, and I was at the University of Oregon. Okay, so I started to get involved with the Yogi Bhajan group, did yoga and things like that, and then I started to visit the Gurdwara that they had there in Eugene, Oregon, and I started to become more involved in the Sikh part of their organization. So I eventually moved down to Los Angeles, where I really got really absorbed in the Sikh aspects of it. I'd say I more or less put the yoga part to the side, more or less.
Yeah.
And I was involved in business at that point, and involved with closely with doing security work with Yogi Bhajan, for Yogi Bhajan too, for many years as well.
3HO security.
Yeah. Yogi Bhajan's person.
During this time, you found yourself in Amritsar.
During the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I went in 1982.
In 1982, you spent some time there. There was another Singh that was already there, who welcomed you when you got there. When I say another Singh, another Caucasian Singh.
Yes. Baba Nam Singh.
Baba Nam Singh.
Yes.
Yeah. And he was already familiar with a certain group that was staying in the Sri Guru Ramdas Nivas.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Who occupied an entire floor in 1982.
Right.
At that point. Explain to me about Sangat, who you met there, and what kind of influence he had on your Sikhi.
Yeah. Well, I met Sanchernal Singh Binderwali there, and it was at a time when there was a lot of unrest there in India. And as a young Sikh, I didn't really understand everything at that time. All right, we were just there
politically.
Yeah, the politics and things like that, and like I said, I was quite young then. At that time, I was 25 years old, I believe, and so Baba Nam Singh had been living there within the Hums for several years, and so he had a lot of experience with Sanchernal Singh's men that were there.
They built a rapport.
So we went up to the top of Guru Nanak Nivas and met Sanchernal Singh there.
Yeah.
And it was quite an experience. I had never really met anybody like him. He was completely different than Yogi Bhajan. I have to say that. He didn't speak any English, so it was really impossible for me to understand what he was saying, although Baba Nam Singh spoke perfect Punjabi, so he was able to translate for me. And he was interested in, because I was white, and how I became a Sikh, and he tried to explain about that a little bit. And but he was there. I can still picture him sitting there, and they were drinking tea, and how they would put the plastic lounge chairs there around the top on the rooftop like they do in Punjab.
Yeah.
And so they were all sitting there, and so we spent several times going up there. I was there a few weeks there in Amritsar, and I remember I remember that every day there would be literally thousands of Sikhs that would line the streets and then march out of the Barsab complex
Yeah.
and then be arrested. This was part of that demonstration that they were having. Yeah, they were having there. Yeah, it was
voluntary arrests.
yeah,
Voluntary
yeah, right. And they had.
prison.
I remember we drove out in parts of Amritsar, and they had these huge camps that were just where had Sikhs were imprisoned there
Yeah.
in these camps out there. So it was quite a
Turbulent time.
yeah, turbulent time. Yeah, and I feel very blessed to have met Sangattv Singh there. He seemed like he was very devout, and his men seemed to be very devout as well. They would get up every morning and do seva at the Darbar Sahib and clean the floors there at the from under Sahib, and all this talk about how they were accused of going out and murdering people at night is completely false. They didn't have time to do it. They were doing seva most of the time there, and they were very committed to their beliefs in Sikhi, and I was very impressed by that. I remember asking. I called up at the time. Of course, there was no internet, so
Absolutely.
I called Yogi Bhajan, and because I was supposed to be the kind of the leader of this they said was a yatra there in India. They called it a yatra anyway. There was two ladies and myself, and then this Baba Nam Singh. Okay,
Yeah.
so I was supposed to be kind of leading the group, I guess. Anyway, so I called Yogi Bhajan and I said, look, I'd like to stay and I'd like to help with this. And he said, absolutely no, come back, So I thought about it later, and I think that Yogi Bhajan did not want us to be part of the Sikhs there in the Punjab. He really kept a really tight control on everything that who we met and what we did. He didn't know anything. In fact, Yogi Bhajan didn't know anything about the people I was meeting there in India or about what we were doing pretty much. They'd kind of outlined where we were supposed to go.
Did he ever
and
give
things
you
like
an opinion on Gursant Singh?
that. Not personally.
No.
No. But he didn't want us to associate with the Sikhs there in the Punjab.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, he made a point. Interestingly, I was on the only so-called yatra that was there. It was the smallest one ever in this 3HO history, and everyone else had been very strictly controlled. Either Yogi Bhajan would go on the yatra, or other leaders in 3HO would go on these yatras and control every single place where people went. For some reason, this yatra, it was in the fall, and maybe it was because there was so much unrest going on. There was so few people on this yacht. Usually there were hundreds that would go on these yatras, but there was only 3 of us, and then Baba Nam Singh had already been there.
Yeah.
So maybe it was just an oversight, or Waheguru wanted me to go.
Baba Nam Singh was not part of 3HO though.
He was part of 3HO.
At that point as well?
Yeah, yes. He was,
Even though
Yogi
he was
Bhajan
staying
had
in the house.
Yogi Bhajan had sent him there in order to study Punjabi and to kind of, the way Baba Nam Singh describes it now, and Baba Nam Singh is not part of 3HO anymore.
No,
he's not a part of it. Is that he thinks that Yogi Bhajan has sent them kind of to spy on things
Yeah.
and to learn about what